The Harrington family estate in the Hamptons is not a home. It's a geometric proof of wealth, a collection of cold, hard angles designed to announce its own importance to the indifferent sea. The lawns are a perfect manicured green, so flawless. They look like computer renderings. The house itself is a minimalist cube of glass and white stone, a place where, I suspect, joy and dust bunnies are both ruthlessly eliminated by a full-time staff. As my wife Clara and I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I felt the familiar, uncomfortable clench in my gut. It was the feeling of a man who was about to be weighed, measured, and found wanting. Clara, sensing my tension, gave my hand a squeeze. "Just for the weekend," she whispered, her voice a small conspiracy. "Smile, eat the tiny food, and think of Portland." "I'm trying," I said, but I think my flannel shirt just spontaneously combusted from being this close to so much old money. She laughed, a real beautiful laugh that was always a little too loud for her family's house. I loved that laugh. It was the reason I had fallen for her in the first place. This brilliant, funny, and seemingly down-earth woman who had wandered into my scruffy Portland music venue one night and completely capsized my world. The front doors, which were absurdly large, swung open to reveal the welcoming committee. There was Clara's older brother, Julian, a man with the predatory smile of a private equity shark. There was her sister, Catherine, whose face was a perfect frozen mask of polite condescension. And behind them, the patriarch himself, Charles Harrington. He was a tall, lean man in his late 60s, with a gaze as sharp and analytical as a laser cutter. He didn't smile. He assessed. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. It was not a greeting. It was a summons. "Welcome." But then, a splash of color and warmth in the monochrome world of the Harringtons. Clara's mother, Eleanor, bustled forward, pushing past her husband. "Clara, Ethan, Assalamat, you are here," she said, her voice a warm, musical melody that was so wonderfully out of place in this sterile mausoleum. She hugged us both, a real, proper hug that smelled of flowers and home. Eleanor was the family's beautiful, inexplicable anomaly. She was from the Philippines, a vibrant, joyful woman from a town called San Jose, who had somehow fallen in love with and married the human equivalent of a block of ice. She was my only ally in this house, the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not a balance sheet. "You look tired, Ethan," she whispered to me as she ushered us inside. "The city is hard. Here, you must rest. I had cook make some pancit for you later, a real taste of home." Charles Harrington looked at his wife, a flicker of something annoyance, embarrassment in his cold eyes before his face settled back into its usual mask of aristocratic indifference. The reason for our visit was Charles's 68th birthday, which was today, Tuesday, August 5th. In the Harrington clan, a birthday was not a cause for celebration. It was a cause for competition. And this was the part I had been dreading. This was the part Clara had tried and failed to explain to me. The tradition, after a tense, mostly silent lunch, Charles led us into what he called the gallery. It was a long, sunlit room lined with glass cases. But the cases did not contain art. They contained puzzles. Intricate, beautiful, and slightly menacing-looking puzzle boxes, each one a marvel of woodwork and engineering. There were spheres made of interlocking rings, cubes with no visible seams, pyramids of polished, exotic woods. "My life's work," Charles announced to the room, though his eyes were on me. each one a testament to the power of pure, unadulterated logic. He walked me down the line of cases, explaining the history of each box. This, he said, pointing to a beautiful rosewood sphere, was from 2010. Julian solved it in under an hour. A new record. Julian, standing behind us, smirked. And this one, he continued, gesturing to a deceptively simple-looking mahogany box, was Catherine's victory in 2014. She was the only one who realized the solution was based on the Fibonacci sequence. Catherine gave a small, smug smile. Clara, I knew, had never won. She was brilliant, but her mind was different. It was creative, chaotic, artistic. It did not move in the same cold, linear way as her father's and her siblings. And in this family, that was a cardinal sin. Every year, on my birthday, Charles explained, his gaze finally settling on me, I present a new challenge, a new box. I give one to each of my children and to their partners. The rules are simple. You have until midnight to solve it. The first one to open the box wins. Wins what? I asked, though I was afraid to know the answer. Wins a controlling share in the family's new investment portfolio for the coming year, he said, his voice flat. A prize worth, this year, approximately $5 million. Stared. At him, it was a game. A sick, twisted annual Hunger Games where he pitted his own children against each other for a prize of $5 million. It wasn't a tradition. It was a psychological experiment. A way for him to constantly reassert his own dominance, to remind them that their worth, their very standing in the family, was something that had to be earned over and over again. It is, he said, a cold, thin smile on his lips, the ultimate test of acumen, of intelligence, of worthiness. It reveals who has the Harrington mind and who does not. The implication was clear. It will reveal if you, the poor musician from Portland, are worthy of my daughter. I felt a wave of nausea. I looked at Clara. Her face was pale. She was looking at the floor, a familiar, resigned sadness in her eyes. I looked at her siblings. Their faces were tense, predatory. They were already sizing each other up, preparing for battle. And I looked at Eleanor, Clara's mother, who was standing by the window, looking out at the sea, her back to the entire ugly spectacle. She wanted no part of this, I realized. But she was trapped. Charles went to a large velvet-covered table. In the center of the room, the dramatic flourish. He pulled back the cover. On the table sat four identical boxes. This year's puzzle. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, a perfect cube of polished ebony and inlaid ivory, with no visible seams or moving parts. It was a black, silent heart. This year's design, he announced, is called the Patriarch. It is my most difficult creation yet. He looked at me. There is one for you, of course, Ethan. The family gathered around the table. The air was thick with a greedy, competitive tension. This was it. The moment of my own test. The moment I was supposed to step up, to prove my worth, to play their sick, twisted game. And in that moment, I knew I would not. "Thank you, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but clear. The use of his first name was a small, deliberate act of defiance. It's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, but I'm afraid I won't be participating. The room went completely, utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. Julian and Catherine stared at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and, I thought, a flicker of admiration. Charles's face, which had been a mask of smug authority, went completely blank. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I said I won't be participating," I repeated, my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "With all due respect, sir, where I come from, family is not a competition. We don't test each other's worthiness. We support each other. Unconditionally." I looked at Clara and then back at her father. "My love for your daughter isn't something I need to prove by solving a puzzle. And my own self-worth isn't something I'm willing to gamble on for a prize." I had drawn a line in the sand. I had rejected not just his game, but his entire worldview. I had looked at the very core of what it meant to be a Harrington, and I had said, "No, thank you." The silence stretched on for a long, agonizing moment. Charles's blank expression slowly, terrifyingly, began to change. The polite, aristocratic mask dissolved, and for the first time I saw the man underneath. His eyes were like chips of ice. His mouth was a thin, white line of pure, unadulterated fury. He did not raise his voice. He did not yell. He did something far more terrifying. He smiled. A cold, dead, reptilian smile. "I see," he said, his voice a soft, venomous purr. "You are a man of principles." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not just anger, but a promise. A promise of a cold and quiet and utterly ruthless retribution. "As you wish," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. He turned his back on me. Let the games begin. As his children greedily grabbed their boxes and retreated to different corners of the room to begin their silent, intellectual war, I was left standing alone in the center of the gallery. I was a pariah, an outcast, the only person in the room who had spoken a word of protest against this toxic ritual. From across the room, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, the woman from San Jose, caught my eye. And in the midst of her own family's cold, ugly battle, she gave me a small, secret, and deeply appreciative nod. It was a tiny gesture of solidarity, a flicker of warmth in a vast, cold, and suddenly very dangerous house. I had stood by my principles. I had defended my honor. But in doing so, I had just declared war on a king in his own castle. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that I was about to find out just how long and how cold a king's memory could be. The rest of my father-in-law's birthday party was a master class in psychological warfare. Having been publicly dismissed by the king, I was now invisible. Charles and his two eldest children, Julian and Catherine, moved through the rest of the evening as if I did not exist. They would look in my direction, their eyes passing right through me, their conversations flowing around me as if I were a piece of furniture. It was a cold, deliberate, and deeply effective shunning. I was a non-person, a ghost at their feast. Clara was caught in the middle, a frantic, heartbroken ghostbuster. She would try to pull me into conversations, her hand a constant, desperate presence on my arm, but her siblings would simply turn their backs and walk away. She was being punished for my crime, her loyalty to me a stain on her own standing. The only person who met my gaze was her mother, Eleanor. She couldn't speak to me. Charles was watching her every move, but several times from across the room she would give me a look of such profound, sorrowful solidarity that it was the only thing that kept me from simply walking out and calling a cab to the airport. The flight back to Portland the next day was a long, tense silence. We were both wounded, both exhausted. The battle was over, but the war, I was beginning to suspect, had just begun. When we landed, I just wanted to go home, to retreat to the familiar, comfortable world of my music, my band, my life. I had no idea that my world no longer existed. Charles Harrington's retribution was not just a cold shoulder at a party. It was a long, dark arm that could reach across the entire country. The first domino fell on a Wednesday. My band, The Weathered, had a meeting with Pacific Sound, a small but fiercely respected indie record label in Portland. It was supposed to be the meeting of our lives. For 6 months, their head of A&R, a guy named Ben, had been coming to our shows, loving our sound. He'd told us the contract was a sure thing. We were on the verge of signing a 2-album deal. It was everything we had ever worked for. We sat in their cool loft-style office, buzzing with nervous energy. Ben came in, but he wasn't smiling. He looked pale, his eyes full of a genuine apologetic pity. "Guys," he began, and I knew from his tone that our lives were about to change. I don't know how to say this. There's been a change in direction," he explained. That Pacific Sound had just been acquired. A new, larger investment group had bought a majority stake in the company that very morning. And their first order of business was to restructure the artist roster. "They want to move away from rock," he said, his voice flat. "They want to focus on pop and EDM. They're cutting all the new rock acts we were developing." He looked at us, his face a mask of misery. "They're dropping you. I'm so sorry. My hands are tied." We were stunned. Our dream, which had been so close we could taste it, had vanished in the space of a 10-minute meeting. My bandmates were devastated. I was suspicious. The timing was too perfect, too neat, too cruel. The second domino fell 2 days later. We had a small 10-date West Coast tour booked for the fall. It wasn't a big tour, just a series of clubs and small theaters. But it was our first real tour. It was a chance to build our audience, to live the life we had always dreamed of. Our booking agent called me on a Friday afternoon. Her voice was frantic. "Ethan, I have some bizarre news," she said. "Every single venue on your tour has canceled, all 10 of them, in the last 24 hours. "What?" I asked, a cold, sick feeling spreading through my stomach. "Why, I don't know," she said, her voice full of disbelief. "It's the strangest thing I've ever seen." They all gave different flimsy excuses. Double booking, unexpected renovations, scheduling conflicts. It's a lie. Someone is deliberately killing your tour. That's when I knew. This was not bad luck. This was not a coincidence. This was a targeted, systematic demolition. This was Charles Harrington. The final domino was the band itself. The loss of the record deal, followed by the cancellation of the tour, was a death blow. We were broke, and now we were in debt. The fragile bonds of our friendship, already strained by years of struggle, finally snapped. Our drummer, a guy I had known since high school, is the one who said it out loud. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said, as we sat in our dingy, silent rehearsal space, "but I'm out. I can't do this anymore." He looked at me, his eyes full of a bitter resentment. "You know, you told us your girlfriend's family was rich. You said they were a little weird. You didn't tell us they were the goddamn mafia. You should have just played the stupid game, man. Should have just solved the stupid puzzle box." And just like that, my band, my brothers, my entire musical family was gone. In the space of 1 week, I had lost my record deal, my tour, and my band. I had nothing left but a mountain of debt and a heart full of a cold, terrifying rage. That night, I told Clara everything. I laid out the impossible coincidences, the whispers of new investors, the targeted destruction of my career. She listened, her face growing paler with every word. She had been hoping, I think, that her father's anger would be limited to a few days of the silent treatment. But she knew her father better than that. "Let me make some calls," she whispered, her face a mask of dawning horror. She spent the next day in a flurry of quiet, intense activity. She used her access, her name, her position as the daughter of the king. She spoke to her father's lawyers, to his accountants. She traced the lines of power that were invisible to the rest of the world. She came back to our small Portland apartment. Late that night, I was sitting in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of my dead band. She didn't have to say a word. I could see the devastating truth in her eyes. "It was him," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "The new investment group that bought Pacific Sound. It's a shell company. It's owned by a holding firm that's owned by my father. He bought your record label, Leo. He bought it and he killed it, just to punish you." Her voice broke and she started to sob. "And the venues on your tour, they're all in buildings owned by Prescott Enterprises. He didn't just make a few calls. He orchestrated the whole thing. He ruined you." She collapsed onto the sofa next to me, her body shaking with a grief and a rage that matched my own. "I am so sorry, Ethan," she cried. "I brought this into your life. I brought him into your life. This is all my fault." I looked at her, at this woman I loved, and I saw that she was as much a victim of her father's tyranny as I was. He wasn't just punishing me. He was punishing her for loving me. He was trying to prove to her that my world was fragile, that my life could be broken by a single snap of his powerful fingers. And in that moment, the last of my despair was burned away, replaced by a pure, unadulterated resolve. He had made a critical error. He thought he was breaking me, but he had only succeeded in breaking the last of my idealism. He had turned a peaceful, principled musician into a man who was ready to go to war. The next evening, as I was staring at a stack of bills I had no way to pay, a new email appeared in my inbox. It was from an encrypted, anonymous address. The subject line was, "From a friend in San Jose." My heart skipped a beat. "Eleanor." The email was short. "Ethan. My husband is a brilliant man, but his mind is a fortress. He believes there is only one way to build a wall, one way to solve a problem. He is wrong. In my hometown of San Jose, we have a saying for men like him. He is a man who is very good at counting the trees, but he has forgotten how to see the forest. Charles only understands his own game. He thinks you are just a musician. He has forgotten that music is just beautiful mathematics. It is patterns. It is logic. Structure. You understand his world better than he thinks. To beat him, you must learn to play his game better than he does. I have attached a small piece of research to help you study. Use it well. Be strong." For my daughter, attached to the email was a single password-protected PDF file. The password was Dungog Honor. I opened the file. It was a scanned copy of a document, a beautiful, hand-drawn schematic. The title was The Patriarch. Design and schematics, C. Harrington, 1998. It was the original design for one of her husband's first and most famously complex puzzle boxes. It was a page from his playbook, a key to his mind. I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. My record deal was gone. My band was gone. My tour was gone. Charles Harrington had taken everything from me. But his wife, his quiet, brave, and rebellious wife, had just given me a weapon. I looked at the intricate, logical, and beautiful schematic on the screen. Then I looked over at my old beat-up acoustic guitar leaning against the wall, a tool of emotion, of creativity, of chaos. Music is just beautiful mathematics. She was right. A new, cold, and thrilling idea began to form in my mind. A new song, a new composition, a new kind of puzzle. Charles Harrington had challenged me to his game, and I had refused. Now I was going to build my own, and he was going to be the one to play it, and he was going to lose. The year that followed my public refusal and private ruin was a year spent in a quiet, self-imposed exile. The world knew me as Ethan Vance, the failed musician, the front man of a promising indie band that had imploded overnight. Ugh, my old friends from the Portland music scene looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, whispering that I'd flown too close to the sun with my rich girlfriend and gotten burned. They had no idea the fire was just what I needed. They saw a failure. In reality, I was an apprentice. My apartment, once a chaotic sanctuary of guitars, amps, and scribbled lyric sheets, transformed. It became a workshop, a laboratory, a monastery. The music posters came down, replaced by complex schematics and blueprints. The amps were pushed into a corner to make room for a luthier's workbench, a soldering station, and a small high-precision lathe. I traded my guitar picks for calipers and my chord progressions for gear ratios. I was a man obsessed. My new secret art form was the art of the puzzle box. My new mission was to understand the mind of my enemy, Charles Harrington, so that I could build a cage for it. Clara was my co-conspirator, my secret agent inside enemy territory. Our relationship, which could have been shattered by her father's attack, was instead forged into something stronger. It was no longer just a romance. It was an alliance, a secret partnership fueled by a shared, righteous anger. Every few weeks, a discreet package would arrive from New York. Inside, I would find books from her father's private library are rare, texts on cryptography, on horology, on mechanical engineering. She would send me photos she had taken of his personal workshop, of his tools, of his early prototypes. And most valuable of all, she sent me his journals. Reading her father's journals was like dissecting a cold alien intelligence. His entries were not filled with emotion or reflection. They were a logbook of pure crystalline logic. He wrote about puzzles the way a mathematician writes about theorems. He saw the world as a series of interlocking mechanisms, a grand, complex machine that could be understood and mastered if you were just smart enough to see the patterns. There was no room in his world for intuition, for emotion, for art. Everything was a problem to be solved through relentless linear logic. I started by building his work. Using the schematics his own wife had secretly sent me, I began to replicate his most famous creations. It was a grueling, frustrating process. My hands, so accustomed to the fluid grace of a guitar fretboard, were clumsy with the precise, unforgiving nature of wood and metal. I made mistakes. I cut pieces incorrectly. I spent weeks on a single gear mechanism, only to realize I had assembled it backwards. But with every mistake, I was learning. I was learning his language. I built the Fibonacci box, the one his daughter Catherine had solved. I built the rosewood sphere, his son Julian's great triumph. I spent a month on each, and by the end, I did not just understand how they worked. I understood how he worked. saw the patterns in his mind, the pathways his logic always followed. He was a genius. Of that there was no doubt. But he was a predictable genius. His mind was a fortress, yes, but it was a fortress with only one gate, and I was beginning to realize I didn't need to break down the gate. I just needed to build a puzzle that required a different key altogether. The breakthrough, the creative spark that would define my revenge, did not come from a schematic. It came from a story. It was late one night, a few months into my obsession. I was on a video call with Clara, frustrated and exhausted, staring at a half-finished replica of one of her father's puzzles. "I don't get it." "Clara," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "It's like there's no soul in his work. It's just cold, perfect math. It's brilliant, but it's dead." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "That's what my mother has always said." She paused. "You know, it reminds me of a story my grandmother used to tell me about the weavers in her hometown of Sibilum." I leaned closer to the screen. Clara's stories about her mother's family were a window into another world, a world that was the complete antithesis of the Harrington clan. She said the master weavers in Sibilum, Clara explained, they don't use patterns or diagrams. It designs these incredibly complex, beautiful patterns. They are passed down from mother to daughter. They are held in their memory, in their hands. My Lola said that when she watched them work, it was like they were listening to a song only they could hear. The rhythm of the loom, the feel of the threads, the pattern would just emerge. It wasn't just a craft. It was a kind of magic. It was a story being told in thread, a song only they could hear. The phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. I looked at the cold, silent puzzle box on my workbench. It was a machine. It demanded a user to think like a machine. But what if I built a box that demanded the user to think like a musician? A puzzle that couldn't be solved with logic alone, but required intuition, rhythm, soul. The idea took root, a tiny, thrilling seed of a possibility. Charles Harrington's mind was a fortress of pure logic. He had nothing but contempt for my world of art and emotion. And that contempt, I realized, was his greatest weakness, his Achilles heel. I was not going to build a better Harrington puzzle box. I was going to build a puzzle box that was, to his mind, completely and utterly unsolvable. A puzzle that required a key he did not possess and would never think to look for. My obsession transformed. I was no longer an apprentice. I was a composer. My workshop became a strange hybrid of a luthier studio and an engineer's lab. I spent the next 6 months designing my masterpiece. I called it the composer's box. The exterior was deceptively simple. It was a perfect cube, about 8 inches on each side, made from 2 contrasting woods. The main body was a piece of beautiful blonde Oregon myrtle wood, a tribute to my home. The intricate flowing inlay was a dark, almost black Filipino camagong, or ironwood, a piece that Eleanor had secretly sent me from an old piece of furniture from her family home. It was my 2 worlds, my 2 identities fused into one. But the beauty of the box was a distraction. The secret was inside. The internal mechanism was a nightmare of complexity, a symphony of gears, pins, and tumblers. But it was not a traditional mechanism. I had used my luthier skills to build a series of small internal resonant chambers, like the body of a miniature guitar. The locking mechanism was not tied to a sequence of slides or rotations. It was tied to sound, to rhythm. The solution was a song. a simple five-note melody from a lullaby my own mother used to sing to me. To open the box, you had to tap that melody in the correct rhythm on 5 different points on the box's surface. Each correct tap in the correct tempo would cause a specific internal chamber to resonate, vibrating a tiny pin into place. Only when all 5 pins were set by the correct sequence of resonant frequencies would the final gear be released, and the box would open. It was a puzzle that could not be solved by sight. It had to be solved by feel, by listening. It was a puzzle that required not just a brilliant mind, but a quiet heart. And a quiet heart, I knew, was the one thing that Charles Harrington did not possess. After a year of relentless, secret work, it was finished. I sat in my workshop, the finished composer's box on the table in front of me. It was beautiful. The light played off the contrasting woods, the camegon inlay flowing like a dark river through the pale myrtle wood. It was silent. It was perfect. I ran my fingers over its smooth, seamless surface. This small wooden cube was the culmination of everything I was: my creativity as a musician, my newfound skill as a craftsman, my love for Clara, and my deep, burning, and patient desire for revenge. It was not just a puzzle box. It was my argument. It was my song. It was my soul, given a form that my father-in-law would be forced to confront. I picked up the phone and called Clara. "It's ready," I said. "Book the tickets to the Hamptons. It's time to go back." The drive to the Hamptons a year later felt like a journey into a foreign country. But this time, I was the one who was foreign. A year ago, I had been the idealistic, slightly intimidated musician, a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse of quiet, aristocratic judgment. Now, I was a different man. The year of secret obsessive work had burned away my naivete. It had replaced my soft, artistic uncertainty with a hard, quiet, and unshakable sense of purpose. I was not a lamb anymore. I was a hunter. And I was returning to the scene of the crime with a perfectly crafted trap in the passenger seat. Clara was a beautiful, nervous wreck. She was my partner in this, my loving co-conspirator. But her family's home was still a place of deep, foundational trauma for her. "Are you sure you want to do this, Ethan?" She asked for the 10th time as we passed the ridiculously opulent gates of the Harrington estate. "I'm sure," I said, my voice calm. In the back seat, in a custom-made, velvet-lined case, was my weapon. The composer's box, my entire year, my entire revenge, distilled into a perfect 8-inch cube of wood. Our arrival was met with a display of polite, cold surprise. It was clear no one had expected me to ever show my face here again. Clara's siblings, Julian and Catherine, greeted me with thin, reptilian smiles. They looked me up and down, their eyes lingering on my simple, dark sweater and trousers. I was still the poor musician in their eyes. The help. They had no idea I was the executioner. Charles Harrington was the most chilling of all. He greeted me with a curt, dismissive nod, as if I were a caterer he vaguely recognized. "Ethan," he said, the name a dead thing in his mouth. "I see my daughter has brought you along again." He had completely written me out of his reality. To him, I was a solved problem, a piece of dust that had been swept away. He had ruined my life with a few phone calls, and it was an act so insignificant to him that he had likely forgotten it by lunchtime. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was all the fuel I needed. He had no idea the ghost he had created was about to come back and haunt him. My only ally, as always, was Eleanor, Clara's mother. She found me later that afternoon as I was walking through the estate's obsessively manicured gardens. She was carrying a tray with 2 glasses of iced tea. "I was surprised when Clara told me you were coming," she said, her voice a low, warm murmur. She handed me a glass. "I'm also very glad. I had to come," I said. "There's some unfinished business." She looked at me, her eyes so much warmer and wiser than her daughter's, full of a deep, knowing sadness. "My husband is a man who believes the world is a machine," she said, not as an apology, but as a simple statement of fact. "He does not understand things that cannot be taken apart and put back together again. Things like music or a person's heart." She took a sip of her tea. "In my home province of Sibilam," she continued, her gaze distant, "the greatest craftsmen were the men who built the paras, the sailboats. They would spend a year building a single boat fitting every piece of wood together perfectly. But the test was not if the boat was beautiful. The test was if it could survive the storm." She turned her wise eyes back to me. "I see you have spent the past year building a new boat, Ethan. I pray it is a strong one." She knew. She didn't know the specifics of my plan, but she knew I had not come here to surrender. She saw the new steel in my spine. She was giving me her silent, maternal blessing. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice thick with a gratitude I could not fully express. She just patted my hand. "I am always on my daughter's side," she said with a small, secret smile. "And you, Ethan, are on my daughter's side. That makes us family." That evening, the family gathered in the gallery. It was the same cold, sterile room from last year, the same glass cases displaying Charles's past triumphs like a collection of captured butterflies. The air was thick with the same competitive tension. Julian and Catherine were pacing, limbering up their minds for the coming battle. Clara and Eleanor stood by the window, a silent, 2-person nation of dissent. And Charles Harrington stood. Before the velvet-covered table, a king surveying his bitter, fractured kingdom. "Welcome," he began, his voice booming in the quiet room. "To my 69th birthday. And to the annual test of Harrington acumen." He gave his usual speech about logic, about worthiness, about the purity of a mind unclouded by frivolous emotion. He was speaking directly to me, every word a subtle, dismissive jab. I just stood there, my face a mask of polite neutrality, and I let him talk. With a dramatic flourish, he pulled the velvet cloth from the table, unveiling this year's puzzle. It was a monster! A complex, intimidating sphere of interlocking brass and titanium rings, with dozens of tiny dials and switches. It looked less like a puzzle and more like a navigational instrument from a lost steampunk civilization. He called it the orrery. Julian and Catherine's eyes gleamed with a greedy, intellectual hunger. As is tradition, Charles announced, "The winner will control the new venture fund for the coming year." He picked up one of the boxes. "Ready?" To hand it to his son. "Excuse me, Charles," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the tense silence of the room like a perfectly struck tuning fork. Every head in the room snapped towards me. Julian and Catherine stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and contempt. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor watched me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. And Charles. Charles turned to me slowly, a look of pure, cold fury on his face. I had interrupted his ritual. I had broken the rules of his game. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I said, "Excuse me?" I repeated, my own voice calm and steady. I walked forward from the back of the room, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I was carrying the velvet-lined case that held my creation. I believe I have a small addendum to propose to this year's tradition. I reached the table and placed my case next to his collection of terrible, beautiful machines. I opened it. Inside, nestled on the black velvet, was the composer's box. It looked almost comical next to his overwrought metallic monstrosity. My box was a simple, elegant cube of wood. It was warm, organic, alive. It was everything his. Puzzles were not. Julian let out a short, derisive snort. "What is that, Ethan? Your high school woodshop project." I ignored him. I spoke only to the king. "For a year," I said, my voice clear and ringing, "I have been thinking about this tradition, about this test, and I find the premise fascinating." I looked around at the faces of his children, then back at him. "It is a fine tradition for a father to test his children. But it has been a very long time since anyone has tested the master." Charles's eyes narrowed. "What is your point, Ethan?" "My point," I said, "is that mastery is not a title. It is a practice, and it should be challenged." I placed my hand on my beautiful, simple box. "This is a new design, a type of puzzle you have never seen before. I am not a Harrington. I do not wish to compete for your money. But I am a guest in your home, and as a guest, I would like to propose a new opening round to this year's game." I looked him directly in the eye, my voice full of a quiet, unshakable challenge. "Before your children prove their worth to you, I would like to see you. Prove your mastery to them. Solve my puzzle, Charles. Show them how it's done." The audacity of my challenge hung in the air, a beautiful, terrifying thing. I had not just interrupted his party. I had questioned his authority. I had questioned his genius. In his own temple, in front of his own acolytes, his first instinct, I could see, was to crush me, to laugh in my face and have me thrown out of his house. But I had him trapped. His children were watching, their faces full of a new, curious light. His wife was watching, her expression one of quiet, fierce pride. To refuse my challenge would be to admit the possibility that he might fail. To refuse would be an admission of fear, and a man like Charles Harrington would not ever show fear. His ego was a cage of his own making, and I had just slammed the door shut. He looked at my box. He looked at me, and he looked at his children. I saw the calculation in his cold reptilian eyes. He saw my simple wooden cube as a toy. He saw me as a frivolous, irrelevant artist. This would be easy. This would be a chance to not just defeat me, but to humiliate me. To prove once and for all the superiority of his cold, logical mind. He picked up the composer's box. It looked small and elegant in his large, manicured hands. He turned it over, examining it, a smug, confident smirk spreading across his face. "Very well, musician," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked at his children, then back at me, a silent promise of my own impending destruction in his eyes. A challenge accepted. He gave a small, cruel chuckle. "Let's see what tune your little box can play." The gallery in the Harrington estate felt less like a room and more like a surgical theater. The air was cold and sterile, the only sound the faint, expensive hum of the climate control system. In the center of the room, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of a modern track lighting system, sat my father-in-law, Charles Harrington. He was a master surgeon, and my puzzle box was the patient on his operating table. The rest of the family were the observers in the gallery, a silent, tense audience waiting for the master to perform his inevitable, brilliant work. He began with a theatrical, arrogant confidence. He placed the composer's box on a piece of soft, black velvet. He produced a pair of thin, white cotton gloves from his jacket pocket and slowly, deliberately put them on. It was all part of the performance, the ritual of the great man at work. Let us see what our young musician has. Composed for us, he said to the room, a small, condescending smile on his lips. He did not look at me. For the first hour, he was a model of dispassionate scientific inquiry. He examined every surface of the box with a jeweler's loupe, searching for a hidden button, a trick seam, a microscopic pinhole. There were none. He measured the box's dimensions with a digital caliper, no doubt running complex geometric calculations in his mind. He waited on a small, sensitive scale, listening for the telltale shift of an internal mechanism. The box, my beautiful silent box, gave him nothing. His children. Julian and Catherine stood behind him, their arms crossed, whispering to each other with smug amusement. "This is pathetic," I heard Julian mutter to his sister. "He's just trying to be clever. Father will have it open in the next 5 minutes." Clara stood beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of terrified hope. My ally, my mother-in-law Eleanor, stood by the window, watching her husband's back with an expression I could not quite read. Charles's methods became more invasive. He produced a set of dental probes, tapping gently on the surface, listening for variations in the density of the wood. He used a thermal camera, searching for the faint heat signature of a hidden electronic component. He even used a small, sensitive magnetometer, looking for hidden magnets. My box, a purely acoustic and mechanical creation, remained a perfect, silent enigma. It was a language he did not speak, a technology he did not understand. He was a man shouting mathematical proofs at a poem, and he was growing increasingly frustrated that the poem was not answering back. After the second hour, the cracks in his cold, aristocratic composure began to show. The confident, methodical surgeon was gone, replaced by a frustrated, angry mechanic jabbing at a machine he couldn't understand. The smug whispers from his children had died down, replaced by a confused, uneasy silence. They had never seen their father fail before. They had never seen him look weak. His movements became agitated. He would pick up the box, shake it violently next to his ear, and then slam it back down on the velvet cloth, a low growl of frustration escaping his lips. He was no longer trying to solve a puzzle. He was trying to intimidate it into submission. "This is absurd," he finally snapped, glaring at me for the first time. "There is no solution. It's a trick. It's a solid block of wood you've polished to look like a puzzle. A cheap magician's prop." "It's not a trick, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "The solution is there. You're just not looking for it. I have looked at every millimeter of this thing," he seethed. "There is no mechanism. There is no entry point." "That's because you're trying to read it with your eyes," I said, and I took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You need to listen with your hands." The room was silent, all eyes on me. I had the stage now. I walked to the table. Charles stood there, his face a mask of thunderous fury, but he did not stop me. I gently took the box from him. "This puzzle is not about finding a key," I said, my voice soft. I looked at Clara and then at her mother. "It's about creating one." Then I played the song. My fingers, so accustomed to the fretboard of a guitar, felt perfectly at home on the smooth, polished wood. I lightly tapped out the five-note melody of the lullaby my mother used to sing to me, my fingers moving to 5 different unmarked points on the box's surface. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm was everything, with each correct tap. A sound so faint it was almost imperceptible came from within the box. A tiny, resonant click. It was the sound of a pin, vibrated into place by the precise frequency of the tap. It was a sound no one else in the room could hear, but to me, it was a symphony. After the final tap, I held the box for a moment, and then with a soft final snick that was impossibly loud in the silent room, a seam appeared, a perfect hairline crack in the ebony surface. I lifted the top of the box off. It was open. The entire Harrington family stared, their faces a mixture of stunned, absolute disbelief. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a jewel, not a key, not a prize. It was a small, simple songbird carved from a single piece of pale Oregon myrtle wood. It was a piece of art, a symbol, a thing with no monetary value whatsoever, a piece of my soul. Charles Harrington stared at the open box, at the small, simple bird inside, and his face, for the first time since I had met him, looked. The arrogance, the fury, the cold intellectual superiority was all gone, replaced by the simple, blank look of a man who has just encountered a truth his mind cannot possibly comprehend. He had not just been beaten, his entire worldview, his entire philosophy of life had been invalidated by a simple 5-note melody. He was a man who had spent his life building fortresses. And a musician had just walked through the front door by simply humming the right tune. His children, Julian and Catherine, were speechless. They were looking at me, the quiet, artistic husband of their sister, with a new, strange, and deeply unsettling emotion. Grudging respect, it was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. She walked from the window to the table, her movements full of a quiet, graceful power. She looked at the open box, at the small bird, and then she looked at her husband. "You see?" "Charles," she said, her voice soft, but with an edge of steel I had never heard before. "The weavers in my hometown, in Cybelum, they do not create with just their minds. They are not just technicians. They create with their hearts, with their spirit, Dungog." She looked at me, a warm, proud smile on her face. "This boy, he understands that. It is a lesson you were never able to learn." She looked back at her husband, at this brilliant, powerful, and suddenly very small man. "You spent your whole life counting the trees, my love," she said, her voice full of a sad, ancient wisdom. "And you forgot how to see the forest." Charles did not say a word. He just stared at the box, at the undeniable proof of his own limitations. He had been so sure of the rules of his world, and I had shown him that a whole other world existed, a world he could not enter. My revenge was complete. I had not ruined him financially. I had not screamed at him. I had simply shown him that his definition of worth was tragically, pathetically incomplete. And he would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. I walked over to Clara and took her hand. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears of pride and relief. Her family, her cold, broken, competitive family, was silent. For the first time, there was no game to be played. We walked out of the gallery, out onto the grand veranda overlooking the sea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt quiet, at peace. I had not joined their game. I had made them play mine. And in doing so, I had not just earned my own place at their table. I had shown them that there were other tables, other games, other ways of being in the world. And that, I knew, was a prize worth more than any $5 million. It was the sound of a new and better song. I woke the next morning in a sun-drenched guest room of the Harrington estate. The sound of the distant sea, a gentle, rhythmic hum. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes after a long, difficult, and finally finished performance. Then the memory of the previous night returned, not as a chaotic dream, but as a series of quiet, crystal-clear images. The look of stunned disbelief on Charles's face, the silent, grudging respect in his children's eyes, the beautiful, triumphant smile on my wife's face. The battle was over, but I had no idea what the terms of the surrender would be. Clara and I walked down to the breakfast room together, hand in hand. The atmosphere was thick with a tense, formal awkwardness. Julian and Catherine were already there, silently nursing. Cups of coffee, their usual sharp, competitive energy replaced by a heavy, chastened silence. They looked like soldiers of a defeated army, unsure of the new rules of engagement. They both nodded at me as I entered. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was a seismic shift in the tectonic plates of the Harrington family dynamic. For the first time, they were not looking through me. They were seeing me. Charles was conspicuously absent. We ate in a silence that was completely different from the cold, dismissive silence of the day before. This was a silence of uncertainty, of a family that had lost its rigid organizing principle and had not yet found a new one. The annual competition was the sun around which their lives orbited. And last night, a strange musical planet had knocked it out of the sky. After a few minutes, Julian, the arch-capitalist, the man who had sneered at my woodshop project, cleared his throat. He looked not at his sister, but at me. The mechanism, he began, his voice a low clinical murmur. The resonant pins. I was up half the night thinking about it. Was it a piezoelectric sensor that registered the vibration frequency? Was the most shocking thing he could have possibly said. It was not an apology. It was not a concession. It was a question. A genuine, curious, professional question from one craftsman to another. He was, in his own transactional way, admitting my expertise. He was asking to learn. No, I said, and for the first time, I felt a genuine, unforced smile in his presence. Piezoelectrics are too crude. It was simpler than that. Sympathetic resonance. The same principle that makes one tuning fork vibrate when another one is struck. The wood of the box itself is the medium. He just stared at me, a look of dawning, grudging awe on his face. My God, he whispered. It's brilliant. From across the table, Catherine, who had been silent, spoke up. The wood, she said, her voice still cool but lacking its usual icy edge. The dark inlay. It's Kamagong, isn't it? Philippine ironwood. Extremely difficult to work with. It is, I said. An interesting choice, she mused. To blend it with the Oregon myrtle. Aesthetically, daring. It was the highest form of compliment she was capable of giving. She was critiquing my work as a serious artist. The shift was profound. I had not just beaten them. I had forced them to speak my language. Later, I found Eliano on the grand stone veranda overlooking the ocean. She was sipping her coffee, a look of quiet, thoughtful peace on her face. "Good. Morning, Ethan," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I trust you slept well." "For the first time in a year," I admitted. Sitting in the chair beside her, "A quiet heart sleeps the best," she said, quoting a saying from her hometown. We sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, watching the waves. "He is not a monster, you know," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "My husband." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "He is a brilliant, powerful, and deeply unhappy man," she continued, her voice full of a sad, complex love. "He grew up with a father who taught him that love was a prize to be won, that worth was a thing to be proven. And so he has spent his entire life building puzzles, building tests for himself and for his children. He thinks he is making them strong. He does not understand that he is just making them lonely." She turned to me, her eyes full of a fierce maternal pride. "And then you came along, the musician, the boy with the heart full of songs. You refused to play his game. And when he tried to punish you for it, you did not build a better wall. You wrote a better song." She reached out and patted my hand. "The weavers in Siblum," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "They believe that the most beautiful patterns are the ones that are not planned, but the ones that are discovered. In the making. You have helped this family discover a new pattern, Ethan. I do not know if it will hold, but today there is hope. I found Charles in the gallery. He was alone, standing in front of the table. My composer's box was there, sitting, open, his own puzzle. The orrery sat beside it, untouched, forgotten. He was holding the small carved wooden bird in his hand, turning it over and over. His expression unreadable. He heard me enter, but he did not turn around. "The solution," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The melody, it was a lullaby. Wasn't it?" "Yes," I said. "My mother's." "Simple," he said, more to himself than to me. "Elegant and completely." Outside my field of view, he finally turned to face me. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the quiet, hollow look of a king who had been peacefully, thoroughly, and completely deposed. He looked tired. "My wife believes I have forgotten how to see the forest for the trees," he said. He looked down at the box in his hand. "Your puzzle is not made of trees. It is the whole damn forest." He was silent for a long moment. I could feel him struggling, the gears of his proud, logical mind grinding against an obstacle they could not compute. He was a man who did not know how to apologize. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He made a business proposition. "Harrington Puzzles is launching a new line next year," he said, his voice stiff, formal. "A line of unconventional designs. Puzzles that require a different kind of logic. Artistic puzzles." He looked me directly in the eye. "I would like to hire you. As a lead consultant." It was the greatest concession a man like him could possibly make. It was an admission of defeat. It was an offer of respect. It was, in its own strange, cold way, an apology. And I, a man who had been financially ruined by this very person, a man who had spent a year of his life consumed with getting his revenge. I looked at this broken, powerful, and profoundly sad man, and I felt a flicker of pity. "Thank you, Charles," I said, and I meant it. But no, thank you, a think. "I'm happy just being a musician." A flicker of a smile, a real one this time, touched his lips. A foolish, financially irresponsible decision. He grunted. Probably, I agreed, but it's mine. We left the Hamptons that afternoon. As we drove away from the grand, cold, and silent estate, Clara put her head on my shoulder. So, she whispered, "What's next, Mr. Vance?" I thought of my band, of the music I hadn't written in a year. I thought of our small, messy, and wonderful apartment in Portland. I thought of the weavers of Sibyllum and the fishermen of the Sulu Sea. I don't know, I said, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. But I have a feeling it's going to be a beautiful song. My revenge was complete. I had. Not just won. I had changed the game. And in doing so, I had freed not just myself, but an entire family from a puzzle that had trapped them for generations. And that was a victory worth singing about.